Before we begin, please be advised that this story delves into themes of mystery, disappearance, and potentially unsettling discoveries. Listener discretion is advised. It was a Tuesday, the kind of dreary, rain-swept afternoon that makes you want to burrow deep into the quiet corners of the world, and for Emily Carter, that corner was always the public library. Not the sleek, modern section with its rows of gleaming new releases, but the forgotten wing. The one where dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the tall, arched windows, illuminating shelves packed with books that had seen more decades than most people. She loved the smell there, a rich, earthy perfume of aged paper, leather, and untold stories. It was a scent that promised secrets, a comforting reminder that the past was never truly gone. Emily was a creature of habit, and her Tuesdays were dedicated to exploring the library's forgotten literary landscapes. This particular week, she found herself drawn to a section she rarely visited: obscure American fiction from the mid-20th century. Books with faded spines and titles that whispered of simpler, yet perhaps more complicated, times. She ran her fingers along the brittle covers, a gentle reverence for the lives these books had touched. Her fingers snagged on a thick, unassuming volume bound in a dark, almost black cloth. The title, barely legible, was something about the Whispering Pines. It looked like it hadn't been checked out in decades. There was a peculiar weight to it, a subtle imbalance that piqued her curiosity. She pulled it from the shelf, a puff of fine, ancient dust rising in its wake. The book felt heavy, solid, almost alive in her hands. As she settled into her favorite armchair, a plush, velvet-covered relic near a leaded glass window, the rain drumming a soft rhythm against the pane, Emily opened The Whispering Pines. The pages were yellowed, brittle, some stuck together with a faint ghost of moisture. She flipped past the title page, past the dedication, until she reached a chapter titled Echoes in the Glen. And there it was, tucked between pages 127 and 128, a single folded piece of paper. Not a bookmark, not a forgotten receipt. This was different. The paper was thick, cream-colored, with the unmistakable texture of quality stationery from a bygone era. It was folded precisely once, then again into a small, neat rectangle. Her heart gave a sudden, inexplicable lurch. It was the kind of instinctual tremor you get when you stumble upon something truly unexpected, something that carries a silent, potent energy. With trembling fingers, Emily unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, looping script, faded but still perfectly legible, written in what looked like dark blue ink. There was no date, no salutation, just 5 lines, stark and chilling, that seemed to suck the oxygen from the air around her. If you find this, it means they won't let me tell my story. The lake holds the secret and the price was too high. Don't let them forget, Michael. Emily read the words again, and then a third time. The rain outside seemed to intensify, matching the sudden storm brewing within her. The quiet hum of the library, once a soothing balm, now felt oppressive, the rustle of turning pages and distant whispers amplified into a conspiracy of sounds. The note was an anchor thrown from the past, dragging her into a forgotten current. They won't let me tell my story. Who were they? What story? The lake holds the secret. Which lake? There were dozens of lakes in the county, small and large, some idyllic, some notoriously deep and dark. The price was too high. What kind of price? Money? A life? And then the name Michael. A common name, yes, but in this context it wasn't just a name. It was a plea, a memory, a ghost. She carefully closed the book, the note still clutched in her hand. Her gaze drifted to the inside cover, where the library's due date card was usually affixed. This one was old, yellowed, filled with faded stamps. The last date, scrawled in a librarian's looping hand, was August 14, 1974. 1974. 50 years ago. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't some recent prank, some casual doodle. This was a message, a desperate cry for help, trapped in time for half a century. A voice from the past, finally breaking its silence through the pages of an obscure novel. Who had written it? What had happened to them? And what about Michael? Had anyone ever looked for them? Had anyone ever known? Emily felt a profound sense of unease, a cold knot forming in the pit of her stomach. She was holding a fragment of a life, a piece of a puzzle that had been lost for 5 decades, and now it was inexplicably in her hands. The weight of it was immense. This wasn't just a mystery. It felt like a responsibility. She couldn't unsee it, couldn't unread it. The quiet solitude of the library, which usually offered escape, now felt like a cage, the silent witnesses of countless books staring down at her, as if urging her to act. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of possibilities and terrifying implications. Had the writer disappeared? Was Michael a victim? Was this a confession? A warning? The note's terse sentences painted a picture of fear, of coercion, of a hidden truth. And Emily, by sheer chance, had stumbled upon it. She imagined the person who wrote it, perhaps sitting in this very library or somewhere nearby, their hand trembling as they penned those words, hoping against hope that someone someday would find them, that their story wouldn't be lost forever, that Michael wouldn't be forgotten. A shiver traced its way down her spine. If they silenced the writer, what would happen if someone started digging now? After 50 years, the trail would be impossibly cold. Witnesses gone, memories faded, evidence vanished. But the note was still here. A defiant whisper across time. Emily carefully refolded the note, her fingers tracing the faint indentations of the old ink. She slipped it back into the book, not wanting to draw attention to it, not yet. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. This wasn't just a story she was reading. It was a story she had become a part of. The world outside the library, with its mundane concerns and predictable routines, suddenly felt distant, irrelevant. All that mattered was the faded handwriting, the desperate plea, and the chilling questions it posed. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she couldn't simply put the book back on the shelf and walk away. The note had chosen her, and now she had to choose what to do with its terrible legacy. The quiet of the library no longer felt safe. It felt like the watchful silence before a storm. The game, it seemed, had just begun. The quiet of the library no longer felt safe. It felt like the watchful silence before a storm. The game, it seemed, had just begun. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the urgency of the note. She carefully slipped the folded paper into the pocket of her cardigan, her movements slow and deliberate, as if any sudden motion might shatter the fragile peace of the afternoon. The old copy of The Wanderer's Guide to Forgotten Trails now felt like a lead weight in her hands, its innocent title mocking the darkness it contained. She couldn't just leave it there. But she also couldn't just walk up to her supervisor, Mr. Henderson, and present him with a cryptic, anonymous note hinting at a 50-year-old crime. What would she even say? "Excuse me, Mr. Henderson, I found this in a book. It says, he knows and they're still here. Should we call the police?" He'd think she'd finally cracked under the pressure of overdue fines and perpetually misplaced Dewey Decimal cards. No, this was different. This wasn't a lost wallet or a forgotten umbrella. This felt personal, dangerous. The note had chosen her, and that choice carried a heavy, unsettling weight. She scanned the vast, silent reading room. A few students hunched over laptops, their faces illuminated by the glow of screens. An elderly woman dozed in an armchair, a newspaper tinted over her face. No one seemed to notice her, yet Sarah felt a prickle on the back of her neck, a sensation of being watched. Was it paranoia, or was the note's chilling warning, "They're still here," already taking root in her mind? Sarah returned the travel guide to its designated spot on the shelf, her fingers brushing against the worn spine. It was a first edition, published in 1972, not particularly valuable, but old enough to have absorbed decades of stories, secrets, and silences. She remembered the faded inscription inside. "To my dearest Amelia, may your journeys always be as boundless as your spirit. Love, Thomas." July 1973. A romantic gesture, now tainted by the sinister discovery. Back at her desk, the fluorescent lights hummed, a stark contrast to the shadowy corners of the stacks. Sarah tried to focus on cataloging a new shipment of graphic novels, but the words of the note pulsed in her mind. Asterisk, he knows. I can't tell you more. Find the truth. They're still here. Asterisk, who was he? Who were they? And what truth was she supposed to find? The sheer ambiguity was terrifying. It wasn't a confession but a plea, a desperate call from the past, trapped between the pages of a forgotten book. She needed to think, to process. Her home, a small apartment overflowing with books and meticulously organized files, offered the perfect sanctuary for clandestine research. As soon as her shift ended, she practically fled the library, the note burning a hole in her pocket. That evening, with a mug of lukewarm tea beside her and her laptop open, Sarah spread the aged, brittle note on her kitchen table. Underneath the stark, typewritten words, she noticed a faint watermark, a symbol she couldn't quite decipher, almost like a stylized M or a pair of intertwined rings. It was too faint to be certain, but it was another detail, another thread. Her librarian instincts kicked in. Where did one begin to find the truth about a 50-year-old secret? With the book itself, of course. The Wanderer's Guide to Forgotten Trails. First edition, 1972. She pulled up the library's digital catalog. The book had been donated in 1974 by a Mrs. Eleanor Vance, along with a collection of other travelogues and antique maps. Mrs. Vance, the system indicated, had passed away in 1998. Dead ends already. But what about the inscription? To my dearest Amelia, may your journeys always be as boundless as your spirit. Love, Thomas. July 1973. This was a crucial lead. Amelia and Thomas. They were connected to the book and potentially to the note. Could Amelia have been the recipient of the book, and perhaps the writer of the note, or the person the note was for? Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. She started with the simplest search, Amelia Thomas, in the local historical society archives, newspaper databases, and even old public records from their town, Oakwood. The library subscribed to several genealogical and historical databases, resources usually reserved for patrons tracing their family trees or local historians. Tonight, they were her personal detective tools. Hours blurred into a dizzying array of names, dates, and snippets of obituaries. Oakwood was a small town, but not so small that an Amelia Thomas would be unique. There were several. An Amelia Thomas, born 1901, died 1985. An Amelia Thomas, born 1945, moved to California in 1968. Another, born 1955, still living in town. None seemed to fit the timeline of the book's inscription or the note's implied urgency in the early 1970s. Then she tried searching for Amelia and Thomas separately, looking for any connections around the early 1970s. This yielded even more results, a haystack of data. Frustration began to set in. The note was so specific, so chilling, yet its origins remained shrouded in mystery. She took a break, pacing her small living room. The note was still on the table, a silent challenge. Find the truth. It wasn't just a suggestion, it felt like an imperative. Suddenly, a thought struck her. The note was found in the book. The book itself had a history. Libraries kept meticulous records, even for donated items. She remembered the physical accession ledgers from the 1970s, large bound books filled with handwritten entries that predated the digital system. They were stored in a climate-controlled archive in the library's basement, a dusty, forgotten realm few people ever visited. It was a long shot, but worth investigating. Maybe the ledgers would contain more details about Mrs. Eleanor Vance's donation, or even a previous owner of the book before it came into Amelia's possession. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the library an hour before her shift, her determination overriding her usual punctuality. She needed to access the archives without drawing attention. The basement was cold and silent, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. Row upon row of metal shelves held forgotten periodicals, microfiche readers, and finally, the heavy, leather-bound accession ledgers. She found the ledger for 1974. Her fingers traced the elegant, cursive handwriting of a long-retired librarian, detailing each new acquisition. And there it was, an entry for The Wanderer's Guide to Forgotten Trails, donated by Mrs. Eleanor Vance, 14 Elmwood Drive. The entry also included a small, handwritten note in the margin, almost an afterthought, previously owned by Amelia Hayes per Ms. Vance. Amelia Hayes, not Thomas, a different last name. This was a critical piece of information. Sarah immediately searched for Amelia Hayes in Oakwood records. This time the results were more focused and chillingly sparse. An Amelia Hayes, born 1950. She had attended Oakwood High School, graduated in 1968. She was listed as living at 14 Elmwood Drive, the same address as Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the donor. This suggested a familial connection. Mother and daughter, perhaps? But then the trail grew cold. There was no marriage record for Amelia Hayes, no death certificate in Oakwood, no forwarding address. It was as if Amelia Hayes had simply vanished after high school. Records indicated she had enrolled in a local community college for a semester in 1968, but then nothing. No degree, no transfer, no employment history in Oakwood after that. A missing person. 50 years ago. The pieces began to click into place, forming a disturbing mosaic. Amelia Hayes, who lived at the same address as the book's donor, who seemingly disappeared without a trace after 1968. The book was inscribed in 1973, 5 years after her last known activity, and the note found in that very book hinted at a secret, a truth, and people who were still here. Sarah's gaze fell back on the inscription. To my dearest Amelia, may your journeys always be as boundless as your spirit. Love, Thomas. July 1973. If Amelia Hayes was the Amelia, who was Thomas? A boyfriend? A friend? Someone who, 5 years after her disappearance, still held out hope for her journeys? Or perhaps someone who knew what really happened to her? The more she dug, the more questions arose. Why would Mrs. Vance donate a book that belonged to her seemingly vanished daughter? Why withhold any information about Amelia's disappearance when she donated the book? And if Amelia had vanished in 1968, how did the book end up with an inscription dated 1973? Did Thomas give it to her before she disappeared? And the date was simply when he wrote the inscription, perhaps in remembrance? Or did he give it to someone else, who then passed it to Amelia, or to Mrs. Vance? This wasn't just a forgotten note anymore. This was a cold case, buried under layers of dust and silence, waiting for someone to uncover it. The note wasn't a warning. It was a desperate plea from the past, specifically asking her to find the truth. Suddenly, the cold of the archive felt more oppressive. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the heavy silence of untold stories, of lives cut short, of secrets kept for decades. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She wasn't just researching. She was disturbing something. And the note's final words echoed in her mind with newfound menace. They're still here. Who was they? And what would happen if she got too close to the truth? The game wasn't just beginning. The stakes just got terrifyingly high. Sarah clutched the faded ledger, a new name, Amelia Hayes, burning in her mind. She had a ghost to find, and a mystery that felt like it was watching her, waiting for her next move. The game wasn't just beginning. The stakes just got terrifyingly high. Sarah clutched the faded ledger, a new name, Amelia Hayes, burning in her mind. She had a ghost to find, and a mystery that felt like it was watching her, waiting for her next move. The library, once a sanctuary of quiet knowledge, now felt like the epicenter of a cold case. Sarah spent the next few days lost in a digital and physical archaeological dig. She started online, a whirlwind of search terms: Amelia Hayes disappearance, missing persons, city name 1970s, local cold cases. The internet, usually a vast ocean of information, proved surprisingly barren. A few snippets about a missing college student from a different state, an elderly woman with the same name, but nothing, absolutely nothing, that aligned with the timeline or the unsettling aura of the note. It was as if Amelia Hayes had been scrubbed from existence, a phantom whose only trace was a cryptic message in a forgotten book. This lack of information, rather than discouraging Sarah, only sharpened her resolve. It meant Amelia wasn't just lost. She was hidden. Frustration gnawed at her. But Sarah knew the internet wasn't the only archive. She returned to the library, not to the modern computer terminals, but to the dusty, quiet corners where time seemed to slow. She delved into microfiches of old newspapers, the brittle pages of city directories from the 1970s, and the heavy, cloth-bound volumes of local high school yearbooks. Hours bled into days. Her eyes ached from staring at faded print, her fingers smudged with ancient dust. She scanned countless faces, read hundreds of names, her heart thumping whenever she saw a girl who even remotely resembled the vague image she'd formed of Amelia. Then, on the third day, a flicker of recognition. She was poring over the 1972 yearbook for Northwood High, a school just a few blocks from the library. And there it was, tucked away in the drama club section, a small black and white photo. A girl with wide, earnest eyes, a shy smile, and dark hair pulled back from her face. Beneath it, in a neat printed font, Amelia Hayes. Her breath hitched. The girl in the photo looked ordinary, sweet even. Not someone who would be at the center of a 50-year-old mystery involving coded messages and a desperate plea. But it was her. Sarah felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline mixed with a chilling sense of dread. She quickly flipped through the rest of the yearbook, searching for any other mention of Amelia. She found her listed as a member of the literature club, and more intriguingly, as an assistant editor for the school's creative writing magazine, The Whispering Quill. This was it. A concrete lead. The yearbook also listed her home address from that period. Sarah scribbled it down, her hand trembling slightly. It was an address in an older residential part of town, not far from the library itself. The sun was setting by the time Sarah found herself driving down Elmwood Street, a quiet lane canopied by ancient oak trees. The houses here were mostly two-story Victorians, well-maintained but showing their age, each with a story etched into its weathered facade. She slowed as she approached the number she'd written down. It was a smaller house than the others, a modest bungalow with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. The windows were dark, some boarded up, and a for sale sign, faded and leaning precariously, stood half hidden in a tangle of weeds. No one lived there. It was empty, abandoned, a silent monument to a past that Amelia Hayes had once inhabited. A wave of disappointment washed over her. Another dead end? Had she come all this way just to find an empty shell? She parked her car across the street, just watching the house, a strange sense of melancholy settling over her. The air was still, the only sound the distant chirping of crickets. As she was about to give up and drive away, she noticed movement next door. An elderly woman, her back slightly stooped, was meticulously pruning a rose bush in her front yard. Her hair was a neat silver bun, and she wore a faded floral apron. She seemed to be humming softly to herself. Sarah hesitated. Should she approach her? It felt intrusive, but this woman had likely lived here for decades. She might be the last living link to Amelia Hayes. Taking a deep breath, Sarah got out of her car and walked towards the neighbor's fence. "Excuse me," Sarah called out gently, trying not to startle her. The woman slowly straightened up, turning with a cautious curiosity. Her eyes, surprisingly bright behind wire-rimmed glasses, met Sarah's. "Yes, dear." Her voice was soft, with a hint of a tremor. "Hi, my name is Sarah Miller. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was just looking at the house next door." Sarah gestured vaguely towards the dilapidated bungalow. "I'm doing some research into a former resident, Amelia Hayes. I believe she lived there in the early 70s. A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or a shadow of old sorrow, crossed the woman's face. She paused, her pruning shears still in her hand, and looked towards the abandoned house. "Amelia Hayes," she repeated, almost a whisper. "Yes, she did. A long time ago. Did you know her?" Sarah pressed, trying to keep her voice even. "I'm trying to find out what happened to her. She disappeared, didn't she?" The woman sighed, a sound heavy with unspoken history. "Please come closer, dear. My name is Eleanor Henderson. It's not often someone asks about Amelia anymore." She motioned towards a small wrought iron bench nestled among her vibrant flower beds. Sarah gratefully sat down. Eleanor carefully placed her shears on the ground and sat beside her, her gaze still fixed on the house next door. Amelia, she was a quiet girl, kept to herself mostly, always had her nose in a book just like I used to. A bright spark she was. Very imaginative. "Do you know what happened to her?" Sarah asked, her heart pounding. Eleanor wrung her hands. "She just vanished. One summer evening in '72, right after graduation. No note, no trace. Her parents, poor souls, they were beside themselves. The police searched, of course, but they never found anything. Not a single clue." "That's what I gathered," Sarah said, trying to prompt her. "It must have been devastating for the community." "Oh, it was. People talked, of course. Whispers. Always whispers. But nothing concrete. Her parents moved away a few years later. Couldn't bear to stay in that house, I suppose." Eleanor paused, her eyes distant. "It wasn't a happy home, you know. Amelia had a difficult time." "Difficult how?" Eleanor hesitated, glancing around as if walls had ears. "Her father, he was a stern man. Very strict. And her mother, well, she was often ill. Amelia carried a lot on her young shoulders. She found solace, I think, in stories. In her writing." Sarah remembered the Whispering Quill. "Did she have many friends?" "Not many close ones. She was a bit of an outcast, I suppose. Too smart for some, too quiet for others. But she did have one. A boy. David." Eleanor's voice dropped, tinged with something akin to disapproval. "David Miller. He was a bit of a wild one, always getting into trouble. Amelia was quite smitten with him, despite her parents' objections." David Miller. Sarah felt a chill. Was it just a coincidence that her own last name was Miller? No, that was a dangerous thought to entertain right now. Do you know what happened to David? Eleanor shook her head slowly. He disappeared too, you know. A few weeks after Amelia. The police thought maybe they ran off together. But it never felt right to me. David was impulsive, yes, but Amelia, she was too responsible to just leave without a word. And she adored her mother despite everything. She wouldn't have just abandoned her. So you don't think they ran away? No, dear. I don't. Felt different. More sinister somehow. David was always getting into scrapes with the wrong crowd. Some older boys from the other side of town. They were a bad influence. Eleanor's gaze hardened. They were very possessive of David. He was easily led. What kind of trouble? Sarah pressed, sensing a critical piece of information. Eleanor sighed again, a deep, weary sound. Just petty things at first. Vandalism, shoplifting. But then it got darker. There were rumors about a break-in at Old Man Hemlock's place, the antique dealer, and then a fire at the old abandoned mill down by the river. The police couldn't prove anything, but everyone knew who was behind it. Those boys. And David was involved? He was always with them. And Amelia, she worried about him constantly. She tried to get him to stop. I saw her yelling at him once, right there in front of their house. She was so upset. She loved him, but she knew he was on a dangerous path. Eleanor's voice trailed off, lost in the echoes of the past. After Amelia vanished, David seemed to go into hiding. And then he was gone too. Just like that. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was far more complicated than a simple missing person case. Did Amelia ever mention anything specific that worried her? A secret, perhaps? Eleanor leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She did once. She came over here late one night just a few days before she disappeared. She was distraught. Said she'd found something. Something David had been involved in. Something terrible. She said she was going to expose them. She said she had proof hidden somewhere safe. She called it her truth box. I remember that. She said she kept her true thoughts locked away in her books. Her books. Sarah's mind raced back to the library, to the note, to the inscription. My truth is in the words. Eleanor nodded, her eyes wide with a lingering fear. Yes. She was a writer, always jotting things down. Poetry, stories, her deepest thoughts. She truly believed words held power. But she never told me what she found, or where she hid her truth box. She just said it was somewhere no one would ever think to look. Somewhere she felt safe. A chill wind seemed to sweep through the quiet street. Sarah looked at the abandoned house, then back at Eleanor Henderson, whose face was etched with a lifetime of unspoken fears. The mystery wasn't just about a lost girl. It was about a dangerous secret, a network of trouble, and a truth Amelia Hayes had tried to bury. The note in the library book wasn't just a cry for help. It was a map to something far more dangerous than Sarah had ever imagined. The game wasn't just beginning. It had been waiting for her, and she had just been handed a piece of the puzzle that pointed directly to a truth someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. And now she knew Amelia Hayes had left behind a truth box, hidden somewhere safe, somewhere in her books. The library, it seemed, still held more secrets than she could ever have imagined. The library, it seemed, still held more secrets than she could ever have imagined. The words echoed in Jessica's mind, a quiet mantra that fueled a new desperate resolve. Amelia Hayes hadn't just left a fragment of a mystery. She had left an entire hidden archive, a truth box, meticulously concealed within the labyrinthine shelves of the very institution Jessica now oversaw. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a mix of excitement and trepidation. This wasn't just about a forgotten note anymore. It was about uncovering a lifetime of unspoken truths, perhaps even protecting them. Jessica knew she couldn't approach this haphazardly. The library contained hundreds of thousands of volumes. To simply start pulling books off shelves would be an exercise in futility, a Sisyphean task that would yield nothing but dust and frustration. She needed a strategy, a way to narrow down the vast ocean of possibilities to a single hidden island. Her first thought led her back to the note itself. It was found in a seemingly random book, The Secret Garden. But was it truly random? Or was the book itself a clue pointing to something else? She remembered the inscription, the faded handwriting, the quiet desperation in Amelia's words. Asterisk, this is not the whole truth. There's more, hidden where only I would look. Truth box in my books. Find it. Tell them. Amelia had said, my books. Did that mean books she personally owned and later donated to the library? Or books she frequently checked out, making them, in a sense, hers through repeated use? Jessica walked through the hushed aisles, the familiar scent of old paper and dust a comfort, yet now imbued with an unsettling aura of hidden messages. She considered Amelia's life. A quiet woman, a scholar, a recluse in her later years. Where would such a person hide something so critical? Not in a prominent, easily accessible place. It would be somewhere obscure, somewhere overlooked, a place that held personal significance only to Amelia. She headed straight for the librarian's office, not her own, but the small, cluttered space occupied by Mrs. Henderson, the library's longest-serving employee. Mrs. Henderson had been at the Elmwood Public Library for nearly 55 years, starting as a page in her teens, long before Jessica was even a thought. If anyone knew the library's nooks, crannies, and forgotten histories, it was Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson, Jessica began, trying to keep her voice calm, devoid of the frantic energy buzzing beneath her skin. Do you have a moment? I need your help with something historical. Mrs. Henderson, a woman whose spectacles perpetually rested on the tip of her nose and whose gray bun was as steadfast as the library's foundation, looked up from a stack of overdue notices. Her eyes, magnified by thick lenses, held a knowing twinkle. Historical, you say? Usually, that means you found another one of Mr. Abernathy's forgotten pipe cleaners in a first edition. What is it this time, dear? Jessica pulled up a chair. It's about Amelia Hayes, the woman who donated the Hayes collection, and whose note we found. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened, a flicker of nostalgia crossing her face. Ah, Amelia, a lovely, quiet soul. She practically lived in these halls, you know. Before her health declined, she was here every day like clockwork. Always in the same chair, by the window overlooking the rose garden. Always with a stack of books that would make a lesser woman buckle. Did she have a favorite section? Jessica pressed, her heart quickening. Or particular types of books she gravitated towards? Oh, absolutely, Mrs. Henderson chuckled softly. She was a scholar of American history, particularly the local history of Elmwood and the surrounding counties. She spent hours poring over our local archives, the microfiche, the old county records. But her passion, her true love, was American literature. She adored the classics. Hawthorne, Melville, Poe, Dickinson, Alcott, she knew them all inside and out. And she had a particular fondness for those early 20th century novelists, the ones who captured the changing American landscape. Jessica mentally filed away the genres: American history, local archives, classic American literature, early 20th century novelists. It was still a broad field, but it was a start. And the Hayes collection? Do you remember anything specific about its donation? Mrs. Henderson leaned back, her chair creaking softly. That was quite a few years ago, maybe 25 years now. She donated a significant portion of her personal library. Beautiful first editions, signed copies, some truly rare finds. We cataloged them, of course, and they're mostly housed in the special collections room, climate-controlled and all that. But I do remember her being very particular about where they were placed. She had specific instructions, which was unusual for a donation of that size. Specific instructions? Jessica leaned forward, her pulse quickening. This was it. This felt like a lead. Yes, Mrs. Henderson mused, tapping a finger on her chin. She didn't want them separated entirely from the main collection. She wanted them integrated, but in a way that preserved their integrity as a collection. So, we created a special subsection within the American Literature section, and another within the Local History section. Each book has a special Hayes collection stamp on the inside cover, but they're shelved alongside our regular copies of the same titles. It was a bit of a headache for cataloging at the time, but Amelia was a generous donor, and a very sweet woman, so we accommodated her. A special subsection, integrated yet distinct, a Hayes collection stamp. This was far more specific than Jessica had dared to hope. Amelia had deliberately ensured her books wouldn't be lost among the general library holdings, but also wouldn't be sequestered away in a locked room where they might never be seen. She wanted them accessible, but to someone who knew what to look for. Someone, perhaps like herself, who was following a trail of breadcrumbs. And do you remember anything about why she wanted them integrated like that? Jessica asked, trying to sound casual, as if this were a mere academic curiosity. Mrs. Henderson sighed, a wistful sound. She simply said she wanted her books to continue to live among their peers, and for future readers to discover them naturally. She was a romantic in that way, always believed in the serendipity of finding the right book at the right time. Mrs. Henderson paused, her gaze drifting towards the window, a faraway look in her eyes. There was one other thing now that you mention it. Something she said, almost as an aside, when we were discussing the shelving arrangements. She said, "The most valuable truths are often found in the most unassuming places, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right pair of eyes." Hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right pair of eyes. The phrase resonated with Jessica, echoing Amelia's note. The truth box wasn't locked away in a vault. It was somewhere on the open shelves, part of Amelia's own collection, disguised among thousands of other books. Jessica thanked Mrs. Henderson, her mind already racing. The special collections room was a dead end for the truth box itself, as those were too carefully monitored. But the integrated Hayes collection within the American literature and local history sections, that was the key. She pictured the long rows of shelves, now narrowed down to a much more manageable, though still substantial, number of books. She began her search in the American literature section. It was late afternoon, the library growing quieter as the sun dipped lower. She pulled out book after book, carefully checking the inside covers for the distinctive Hayes collection stamp. Each time she found one, she didn't just look at the stamp. She ran her fingers along the spine, checked between the pages, even gently fanned the leaves, searching for any unusual thickness, any hidden compartment, any foreign object. The task was painstaking. Hours passed. The initial surge of adrenaline began to wane, replaced by a growing weariness. She found dozens of Hayes collection books, a first edition of Moby Dick, a beautifully bound copy of Leaves of Grass, a worn but cherished Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Each was a treasure in its own right, a testament to Amelia's literary passion, but none yielded the truth box. As darkness settled outside, casting long shadows between the shelves, Jessica moved to the local history section. The books here were often older, heavier, filled with forgotten names and dates. She scanned for the Hayes collection stamp, her eyes aching from the strain. Biographies of forgotten town founders, dusty tomes on Elmwood's early industries, collections of old newspaper clippings. Then she found it. Not a truth box immediately, but something that made her stop cold. It was a thick, unassuming volume titled Elmwood, a Centennial Chronicle 1870-1970. It bore the Hayes collection stamp, but as she opened it, a small, almost imperceptible detail caught her eye. Tucked deep within the hinges of the front cover, almost flush with the binding, was a tiny faded piece of paper. It was folded multiple times, barely visible. With trembling fingers, Jessica carefully pried it loose. It was a bookmark made of stiff, aged cardstock, and on it, in Amelia Hayes' unmistakable hand, were a series of numbers and letters, arranged like a rudimentary code. Asterisk P17.
L3 astérisque astérisque.
Asterisk S2. R. 5. Asterisk asterisk. Asterisk B4. Z. 12. Asterisk asterisk. It wasn't the truth box. It was a map. A new set of instructions, cryptic and precise, leading her deeper into Amelia's carefully constructed labyrinth. The library, it seemed, was still playing its part in this intricate game, and Jessica, now armed with a new cipher, felt a renewed surge of purpose. She was getting closer, far, far closer. The new cipher Jessica held was a series of terse, almost brutal lines, each a jumble of numbers and letters. It wasn't a simple substitution key like she'd half expected. This was something far more intricate, something that demanded not just intellect, but an understanding of Amelia's peculiar mind. The first line read, 813.54p972yp, 123w5. The next, 973.92p387sp, 78w14, and so on for nearly a dozen lines. Jessica stared at them, the paper feeling heavy in her hand. For a breathless moment, frustration threatened to swamp her. She'd broken the first code, found this note, but now she was back to a puzzle she couldn't immediately grasp. She scribbled in her notebook, trying to find a pattern, a common thread, a repeated sequence. Nothing. Just looked like gibberish. Then Amelia's final instruction from the previous note echoed in her mind. The library's own system holds the key. the library's own system. It clicked. The numbers weren't random. 813.54, 973.92. These weren't just numbers, they were Dewey Decimal Classification codes. The letters and numbers that followed P972Y, P387S. They looked like specific call numbers, the unique identifiers assigned to every single book in the library's vast collection. And P123W5, page 123, word 5. Amelia wasn't hiding a message in a cipher. She was hiding it within the library itself, using its meticulously organized system as her canvas. Each line in the note was a precise instruction. Go to this specific book, turn to this specific page, find this specific word. The words strung together would form the message. A shiver of excitement, cold and sharp, ran down Jessica's spine. This was genius. This was Amelia's final brilliant game. And Jessica was ready to play. Swinging her backpack onto her shoulder, she moved with a renewed sense of purpose. Her first stop wasn't the stacks, but the old circulation desk where the original card catalog still stood, a relic of a bygone era, alongside the humming computers of the modern system. She needed to confirm the exact titles for those call numbers, to ensure no ambiguity. Her fingers danced over the smooth, worn oak of the card catalog drawers. She pulled out the 813.54 drawer, the one for American fiction of the mid-20th century. Her eyes scanned the cards, searching for P972Y. There it was, a yellowed card, faded ink, listing a novel by a forgotten author, published in the early 1970s. She quickly jotted down the full title. She repeated the process for each call number on Amelia's list, a growing stack of book titles accumulating in her notebook. Armed with her list, she navigated the labyrinthine aisles of the library's lower levels, the hushed sanctuary of the stacks. The air grew cooler, heavier with the scent of aged paper and dust. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long dancing shadows between the towering shelves. Each row was a silent sentinel, guarding stories and knowledge accumulated over decades. She found the first section, 813.54. The shelves here were packed, books crammed together, spines a kaleidoscope of colors and textures. She meticulously searched for the specific title, her heart thumping a steady rhythm against her ribs. There it was, tucked between two much larger volumes, its cover worn, its pages slightly yellowed. Holding the book carefully, as if it were a fragile artifact, Jessica found a quiet corner tucked away behind a row of encyclopedias. She opened to page 123. Her eyes darted across the lines, counting, her finger tracing the words. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fifth word. She wrote it down in her notebook, a single unassuming word. She moved on to the next call number, then the next. Each book was a small adventure, a journey into a different corner of the library, a different world. She found herself in sections she'd never explored before. Obscure historical analyses, forgotten poetry collections, dusty scientific journals. The process was slow, painstaking. The silence of the library pressed in around her, broken only by the rustle of pages, the soft click of a pen, and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. She worked for hours, the afternoon sun slanting through the high windows, then fading into the twilight. Her initial excitement had settled into a focused, almost meditative state. Each found word was a small victory, a tiny piece of the puzzle falling into place. She was no longer just a librarian. She was a cryptographer, an archaeologist of words, digging through layers of time and ink. Finally, the last word was found. Jessica sat back, her shoulders aching, her eyes tired but triumphant. She looked at her notebook, at the string of words she had painstakingly extracted from the heart of the library. She arranged them, reading them aloud softly, piecing together Amelia's final desperate message. The words formed a chilling, urgent plea, a stark revelation that made Jessica's blood run cold. Thomas Miller. He knows. The truth lies buried where the river meets the old mill. 50 years. He waited. Justice. Jessica reread the message, her mind reeling. Thomas Miller. A name. A real person. Not a hidden symbol or a cryptic reference, but a living, breathing individual. And a location. Where the river meets the old mill. This wasn't just a library mystery anymore. This was a direct call to action, a mandate to find someone, to uncover a truth that had been buried for half a century. 50 years. The note in the book, the original catalyst for this entire odyssey, had been left for 50 years. And now Amelia's final message confirmed that time frame, emphasizing its significance, its burden. He waited. Who waited? Thomas Miller? Waited for what? For someone like Jessica to finally pick up the thread? The gravity of it all settled upon her. Amelia wasn't just leaving breadcrumbs. She was leading Jessica to a potentially dangerous secret, a decades-old injustice. The thrill of the chase was suddenly laced with a tangible sense of unease. What had happened 50 years ago that Amelia felt compelled to reveal, even from beyond the grave? What truth did Thomas Miller hold? And why had it remained hidden for so long? The library, once a place of quiet refuge, now felt like a launching pad, a gateway to a world she hadn't known existed. Jessica closed her notebook, the message seared into her memory. She had a name, she had a location, and she had a deep, unshakable conviction that this was far from over. Her next step was clear, albeit daunting. She had to find Thomas Miller. She had to find the old mill. And she had to uncover the truth of what had happened 50 years ago, that Amelia had died trying to reveal. The silence of the library seemed to hum with anticipation, urging her onward. The silence of the library seemed to hum with anticipation, urging her onward. Sarah didn't hesitate. She pushed back from the table, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, and headed straight for the local history and archives section. The old microfiche machines, dusty bound yearbooks, and stacks of faded newspapers held the only answers she had left. This wasn't about a dusty old book anymore. It was about a life, possibly two, that had been tragically cut short, and a truth that had been buried for half a century. She started her search methodically. Thomas Miller. It was a common name, and the challenge immediately presented itself. The city directories from the early 1970s listed dozens of Thomas Millers. A tailor, a plumber, a teacher, a postal worker. None of them, on the surface, seemed to have any connection to Amelia or a cryptic note about a mill. Sarah felt a familiar knot of frustration tighten in her stomach. This wasn't going to be easy. She shifted her strategy. If Thomas Miller was too broad, she needed to narrow it down with the other key piece of information. The mill. What kind of mill? Where was it located? She began sifting through old industrial records, city planning documents, and even newspaper archives for mentions of local mills operating in the early 1970s. There were a few large ones, mostly textile mills, and a couple of smaller lumber operations that had long since closed down. Hours blurred into a focused blur of clicking microfiche readers and turning brittle pages. The sun began to dip outside, casting long orange shadows through the library's tall windows. Her eyes, tired but determined, scanned articles about local business, labor disputes, and community events. Then, a small, almost inconsequential mention in a 1972 City Council meeting transcript caught her attention. A brief discussion about zoning changes near Blackwood Mill, an old textile factory on the outskirts of town, near the old River Road. Blackwood Mill. The name resonated with a faint, unsettling echo in the quiet library. She cross-referenced it with an old city map from 1973. There it was, marked clearly, Blackwood Textile Mill. A sprawling complex of red brick and towering smokestacks, situated along a bend in the Ravenwood River. The map showed a remote, almost isolated location, surrounded by dense woods, far from the bustling downtown area. Now she had a specific mill. This was her lead. Sarah dove back into the archives, searching specifically for Blackwood Mill and Thomas Miller. She found a series of articles from the late 60s and early 70s detailing labor disputes, a minor fire, and then, more ominously, a series of unexplained accidents. Nothing major, but enough to create a pattern of unease. A worker losing a limb to machinery, another falling from a catwalk, a supervisor mysteriously disappearing for a week before reappearing with no memory of what happened. The newspaper reports were always vague, attributing everything to industrial hazards or personal matters. But reading them now, in the context of Amelia's desperate plea, Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's air conditioning. She kept digging, her fingers dusty from old newsprint. Finally, in a small article from 1974 about a new safety initiative at Blackwood Mill, she found it. A list of key personnel involved in the new program, including the plant foreman, Thomas Miller. This wasn't just a Thomas Miller. This was the Thomas Miller, directly connected to the very mill Amelia had mentioned, A jolt of adrenaline surged through her. She was on the right track. With a specific Thomas Miller and a specific mill, she could narrow her search even further. She looked for personnel records, employee lists, anything that might give her more insight into this man. She found a few more mentions of him as a diligent, if somewhat stern, foreman. He lived in a modest house on Elm Street, a quiet residential area a few miles from the mill. But then the trail became darker. A small obituary from 1975, just a year after Amelia's note was likely written. Martha Miller, beloved wife of Thomas Miller, passed away unexpectedly at the age of 48. The cause of death was listed simply as an unfortunate household accident. No details, no police report mentioned, just a short, almost dismissive notice. Sarah stared at the words, a cold dread seeping into her bones. An unfortunate household accident, for the wife of the man Amelia was desperate to warn? The timing was too precise, too chilling to be mere coincidence. She searched for any follow-up, any police investigation, but found nothing. It was as if Martha Miller's death had been swept under the rug, a quiet tragedy quickly forgotten. And then another discovery. Property records showed that Thomas Miller sold his Elm Street home barely 6 months after his wife's death. The sale was quick, the price surprisingly low for the market at the time. After that, he vanished. No forwarding address, no further local records, no trace of him in any subsequent city directories or newspaper archives. It was as if Thomas Miller had simply ceased to exist in Blackwood after 1975. He had left town, disappeared, right after his wife's death, which itself had occurred suspiciously close to the events hinted at in Amelia's note. The pieces were beginning to coalesce into a deeply unsettling picture. Amelia's plea, her subsequent disappearance, Martha Miller's accident, and Thomas Miller's sudden departure. They were all connected, tied together by the grim specter of Blackwood Mill. Sarah then looked up the fate of Blackwood Mill itself. The articles showed it struggled through the late 70s, facing increasing environmental regulations and declining demand for textiles. It finally closed its doors permanently in 1982, a victim of changing times and its own checkered past. For years it stood abandoned, a skeleton of brick and rusted metal, slowly decaying. Locals spoke of it with a mix of fear and superstition, tales of strange lights and unsettling sounds emanating from the derelict buildings. Finally, in the late 1990s, the entire complex was demolished. The land was cleared, rezoned, and now, according to the latest city maps, it was a large empty lot, part of a proposed future industrial park. An empty lot. The mill itself was gone, but the land remained. The place where it all happened. The realization hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. The note wasn't just about a secret. It was about a chain of events that had destroyed lives, swallowed truths, and left a gaping wound in the town's history. Amelia had known something so dangerous that it had not only cost her her life but had also very likely led to the death of Thomas Miller's wife and his own subsequent disappearance. The librarian, a kindly older woman named Eleanor, approached her table. "Closing in 5 minutes, dear," she said softly, her voice cutting through Sarah's intense focus. Sarah looked up, blinking. The library was almost empty, the outside world now completely dark. She gathered her notes, her mind racing. She had a location, the old Blackwood Mill site. She had a person of interest, Thomas Miller, whose life had been inexplicably shattered in the wake of Amelia's desperate warning. And she had a deep, gnawing certainty that the answers lay buried, not just in old records, but in the very soil where the mill once stood. The darkness outside the library window seemed to mirror the shadows gathering around this decades-old mystery. She had to go there. She had to visit the mill site. The next morning, the urgency that had gnawed at Emily through a restless night propelled her out the door before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. The desire to understand, to peel back the layers of a 50-year-old secret, was a palpable force. She knew the general location of the old mill site. Local historical society archives, though sparse on details about the fire itself, did provide maps of the area from that period. It was a half-hour drive out of town, past the last scattering of suburban homes, giving way to winding country roads flanked by dense forest. The further she drove, the more the landscape seemed to retreat into itself, the trees growing taller, the air cooler, carrying the damp scent of earth and decay. The road eventually narrowed, becoming a gravel track barely maintained, until it finally petered out into a muddy, overgrown clearing. This was it. The silence here was profound. broken only by the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze and the distant call of a bird. It was a silence that felt heavy, pregnant with untold stories. Stepping out of her car, Emily was immediately struck by the atmosphere. The air was thick with the ghost of industry, a faint metallic tang lingering beneath the moss and damp earth. All that remained of the once thriving Northwood mill were skeletal fragments, crumbling stone foundations swallowed by ivy, rusted iron beams twisted into grotesque shapes, and scattered piles of charred timber, now softened by decades of rain and sun into spongy dark mounds. Nature had reclaimed its territory with ruthless efficiency, weaving a thick tapestry of vines and brambles over what was once a testament to human endeavor. She pulled out her phone, not for signal. She knew there wouldn't be any out here, but to refer to the old map she'd downloaded. The mill had been a substantial structure, a sprawling complex of buildings. The fire, according to the scant reports, had been devastating, reducing most of it to ash. Yet, as she traced the outline of the main building's foundation, a detail from the old town records resurfaced in her mind. A mention of a storage annex added a few years before the fire, located slightly apart from the main structure. It was briefly noted, then never mentioned again in any of the fire reports she'd found. Emily began to pick her way carefully through the undergrowth, pushing aside thorny bushes and stepping over fallen logs. The ground was uneven, treacherous with hidden roots and loose stones. She felt a prickle of unease, a sense of being watched, though she knew she was utterly alone. It was the kind of place where shadows felt deeper, where the past seemed to press in on the present. Following the faint suggestion of an old, overgrown path that diverged from the main foundation, she found herself at a slightly elevated section of land, away from the worst of the wreckage. Here, the trees were particularly old and gnarled, their roots snaking across the ground like ancient serpents. And then she saw it. Partially obscured by a dense thicket of blackberry bushes and a cascade of ivy, was a section of masonry that looked different from the rest. It wasn't the rough-hewn stone of the main mill foundation, but rather a more refined, almost domestic-looking brickwork, dark with age and moisture. Her heart began to pound a little faster. This had to be the annex. With a surge of adrenaline, Emily began to clear away the overgrowth, tearing at the tenacious vines and thorny branches with her bare hands, ignoring the scrapes and scratches that immediately appeared on her skin. Beneath the natural camouflage, a low, squat structure slowly revealed itself. It was mostly collapsed, the roof long gone, but one corner still stood, a three-sided room open to the elements. And in the center of what would have been the floor, beneath a thick layer of compacted leaves and earth, was something that made her freeze. It was a small, almost perfectly preserved wooden chest. Not a large, heavy trunk, but a sturdy, handcrafted box, about the size of a shoebox, made of dark, polished wood, bound with tarnished brass straps. It looked shockingly out of place amidst the ruin, as if it had simply been deposited there yesterday, rather than having endured half a century of neglect. It had clearly been buried, but shallowly, perhaps in haste, and then forgotten. Emily knelt down, brushing away the last of the debris. The wood was surprisingly intact, a testament to its quality and perhaps its contents. The brass straps were corroded, but the small latch, though stiff, seemed unbroken. She pulled at it, gently at first, then with more force. It gave way with a faint metallic groan, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the overwhelming quiet. Her breath hitched as she slowly lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst what looked like dried leaves and fragments of old cloth, were two items. The first was a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was weathered and faded, but the pages within seemed remarkably preserved, protected by the box and the natural dryness of its contents. The second item was a tarnished silver locket, suspended on a delicate, equally tarnished chain. It was oval-shaped, intricately engraved with a swirling pattern of leaves and flowers. Emily carefully took out the locket first. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pried it open. Inside, on one side, was a tiny sepia-toned photograph of a young man with kind eyes and a serious expression. On the other side, tucked neatly, was a lock of dark hair, tied with a faded red ribbon. The man in the photograph, it had to be Samuel Miller. The facial structure, the set of his jaw, even the faint scar above his left eyebrow, it matched the few blurry images she'd found of him in the old newspaper archives. This was a personal item, something deeply cherished. It cemented her conviction that she was on the right path. Then, with even greater reverence, she picked up the journal. The leather felt cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. She opened it to the first page, her eyes scanning the faded ink, written in a neat flowing hand. October 12th, 1973. The date sent a chill down her spine. It was just days before the fire. She began to read, her voice a whisper in the desolate air, as if afraid to disturb the ghosts of the past. Asterisk, the air around the mill is thick with unease. I can feel it, a creeping dread that settles in my bones. It's not just the usual grind, the long hours. Something else. Something dark. I've seen things, heard whispers. Things that don't belong in a simple lumber mill. The shipments, they're not just timber. Not anymore. I've tried to ignore it, to tell myself it's not my concern, but the weight of it is crushing me. Asterisk. Emily paused, her mind racing. Not just timber? What else could Samuel have been referring to? Illicit goods? Something dangerous? She turned the page, the fragile paper rustling softly. Asterisk, they're using the annex, the one I helped build. They think no one notices, but I do. Late nights, strange vehicles. Men I've never seen before, not from around here. They move with a quiet efficiency, a coldness that chills me more than the autumn air. I saw a crate, just a glimpse, but it was enough. Not wood. Something heavy. Something metal. And the symbols on it. I don't understand them, but they felt wrong. Ancient. Forbidden. Asterisk. A shiver ran down Emily's spine. Symbols? Forbidden? This was far more sinister than she had ever imagined. The mill fire, the missing person, it wasn't just a tragic accident or a simple disappearance. Samuel was caught up in something much larger, much darker. She continued, her eyes devouring the words. Asterisk, I tried to talk to Daniel. He just laughed it off, told me to mind my own business. Said I was imagining things, working too hard. But his eyes, they were different. A flicker of fear or something worse. Complicity? I don't know. I feel utterly alone. This secret is too big to carry, but too dangerous to reveal. I'm afraid, truly afraid, for the first time in my life. I think they know I've seen something. They're watching me. The note. It's a desperate hope. If I can just leave a trail. If I can just make sure someone knows. If anything happens to me, look in the book. The old one. The one about the local legends. I told Mary to keep it for me. It's the only way. Asterisk. The words hung in the air. A desperate plea from the past. The note. The library book. It all clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. Samuel hadn't just disappeared. He had been aware of a grave danger. A secret so profound it threatened his life. He had sought to expose it, to leave a breadcrumb trail for anyone who might come looking. And now, 50 years later, Emily had found it. But the implications were chilling. If Samuel was being watched, if he was trying to expose something illicit, then the fire at the mill was no accident. It was a cover-up. And Samuel Miller hadn't simply vanished. He had been silenced. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, rattling the dry leaves and making the skeletal trees groan. Emily clutched the journal tightly, her gaze sweeping around the desolate site. The feeling of being watched intensified. No longer a vague prickle of unease, but a cold, undeniable certainty. She was no longer just an investigator. She was now deeply entangled in a dangerous secret, one that someone had gone to great lengths to bury. And if they had silenced Samuel, what would they do to her? Now that she had unearthed his desperate truth, she had to read the rest of the journal, every single word. The answers, and perhaps even more danger, lay within its faded pages. Emily's hands trembled, not just from fear, but from the electric current of Samuel's urgency that seemed to pulse from the faded pages. She had to know. Every word was a step closer to a truth that had cost him his life. Taking a deep, ragged breath, she turned the page, diving headfirst into the maelstrom of his final days. Samuel's meticulous handwriting, once neat and scholarly, began to show signs of increasing distress. Early entries detailed his initial foray into the town's archives, a seemingly innocuous project to compile a local history almanac. He'd started with the town's founding, the original land grants, the prominent families who had first settled Willow Creek. It was a tedious task, he wrote, but one that promised a quiet satisfaction. Then the first crack in the facade. He noted a peculiar discrepancy in the land deeds of the Sterling family, one of Willow Creek's oldest and wealthiest lineages. A large tract of land, historically significant for its unique geological formations and rich topsoil, appeared to have been acquired under dubious circumstances in the mid-19th century. The official record stated a fair purchase from a small, transient community that had mysteriously vanished shortly after. But Samuel, with his historian's instinct, found faint, almost erased references in a series of obscure personal letters and old church ledgers that hinted at something far more sinister. He wrote of discovering a local legend, rarely spoken of, about a forgotten settlement known as the Hollow Creek people. They weren't indigenous, but a group of isolated, self-sufficient artisans and farmers who had lived in harmony with the land, just outside the official boundaries of Willow Creek. They were known for their unique pottery, glazed with a distinctive iridescent sheen from a rare mineral found only in the region. Samuel theorized that this mineral, dismissed by the early settlers as mere decorative clay, was actually highly valuable, perhaps for industrial or even scientific purposes, far ahead of its time. The journal entries became more fervent. Samuel had cross-referenced old census records, tax documents, and even forgotten coroner's reports from the era. He found a sudden, inexplicable surge in wealth for certain founding families, the Sterlings, the Davenports, the Whitmans, coinciding precisely with the disappearance of the Hollow Creek people and the expansion of their land holdings. There were no official records of conflict, no mass graves, just a chilling silence where a community once thrived. They didn't just vanish, Samuel had scrawled, the ink pressed deep into the paper. They were erased, systematically, for the land, for the mineral, for the power it granted certain men. His research then shifted from historical curiosity to an urgent investigation. He began to suspect that the official narrative of Willow Creek's prosperity was built on a foundation of theft and murder. He described his attempts to find any surviving descendants of the Hollow Creek people, or even distant relatives who might have inherited fragments of their history. He found nothing. It was as if they had been scrubbed from existence. The tone of the journal grew increasingly paranoid. October 12th, one entry read, "My apartment was disturbed today. Nothing taken, but things were moved. A book slightly out of place. A drawer ajar. They know I'm close. They're watching." He wrote about subtle threats, veiled warnings from unexpected sources. A casual conversation with a local historian, Daniel Evans, who suddenly became evasive and advised Samuel to let sleeping dogs lie. A phone call from an anonymous number, the line silent, only the faint sound of breathing on the other end. He started taking circuitous routes home, checking his mirrors, feeling the prickle of unseen eyes on his back. Samuel believed that the descendants of the original perpetrators were still protecting the secret. The Sterlings, the Davenports, the Whitmans, their families still held immense sway in Willow Creek. They controlled the town council, the major businesses, even the local historical society. The truth, if exposed, would not only shatter their reputations but could lead to legal repercussions, land claims, and a complete reevaluation of the town's very identity. He started making copies of his most damning findings, distributing them to what he hoped were safe places. He mentioned a bank safety deposit box in a neighboring town, a trusted friend who worked in academia miles away, and a secret compartment he'd built into an old piece of furniture. His entries became a desperate race against time. He was trying to build an unassailable case, a network of evidence that would survive even if he didn't. November 5th, another entry. "They approached me directly today. Not a threat, not overtly. A proposition. A generous donation to the library to my research if I would simply pivot my focus. If I would abandon this line of inquiry." They spoke of the town's delicate balance, its reputation. I saw the steel in their eyes beneath the polite smiles. I refused. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She could almost hear Samuel's defiant voice, his unwavering commitment to the truth. She pictured him, a quiet scholar, standing firm against the powerful forces that had woven themselves into the fabric of Willow Creek. The entries after November 5th became shorter, more frantic. "They're tightening the net. My phone is tapped. My computer is compromised. I can feel them closing in. I've hidden the most crucial piece. The last piece. It's not in the library. Not anymore. It's where they'd never think to look. A place of peace. A place of remembrance. A place of peace. A place of remembrance." Emily's mind raced. What could that mean? A cemetery? A memorial park? A church? The final, chilling entry, dated December 1st, just days before the library book was found, was almost illegible in its haste. "They know I know. The meeting is tonight. They want to discuss my findings one last time. I'm going. I have to. But I'm not going unarmed, not metaphorically. The truth is my weapon. If I don't return, if this journal is found, know this. The Hollow Creek people deserve justice. And the Sterlings, the Davenports, the Whitmans, they are the architects of this lie. The evidence. It's hidden where the quiet whispers of the past meet the silent promises of the future. The willow will guide you. The willow will guide you. Emily stared at the last words, a cold dread seeping into her bones. Samuel had gone to that meeting, armed with the truth, and he had never returned. They had silenced him, just as they had silenced the Hollow Creek people over a century ago. The note in the library book, the frantic plea for help, was his desperate, final attempt to ensure his work wasn't in vain. She closed the journal, her hands still trembling, but now with a fierce resolve. The magnitude of what Samuel had uncovered was staggering. It wasn't just a forgotten murder. It was a systemic cover-up spanning generations, a conspiracy that had shaped the very identity and prosperity of Willow Creek. The founding families, revered as pillars of the community, were built on a foundation of blood and lies. And now Emily held the key to unraveling it all. She understood the danger. She understood why Samuel had been so afraid. She was no longer just an innocent bystander who found a strange note. She was a participant, an inheritor of Samuel's desperate mission. The Sterlings, the Davenports, the Whitmans, they were still here, still powerful, still protecting their dark secret. And now they would be looking for the journal. They would be looking for whoever had found it. Emily knew with a chilling certainty that the quiet whispers of the past had just become a deafening roar in her own life. She had to find the evidence Samuel spoke of. She had to find the willow. Her survival and Samuel's justice now depended on it. The chilling certainty gripped Emily, twisting her stomach into knots. The quiet whispers of the past had just become a deafening roar in her own life. She had to find the evidence Samuel spoke of. She had to find the willow. Her survival and Samuel's justice now depended on it. She scrambled backward from the monitor, her chair scraping against the polished floor of her small office. Her breath hitched ragged and shallow. The words Samuel had typed, stark and unforgiving, burned behind her eyes. Asterisk, they will silence you. Find the willow. It's the key. The truth is hidden there. Don't trust anyone. Not the police. Not the system. Just the willow. Asterisk. Emily's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, then hesitated. Call David. No, Samuel said not to trust the system. David was a detective, part of that system. Could she truly not trust him? The thought was jarring, unsettling. David had been her rock through this whole strange journey. But Samuel's desperation, his 50 years of silence, his cryptic warnings, they carried a weight that eclipsed her personal feelings. She was alone, truly terrifyingly alone. Her apartment, usually her sanctuary, now felt like a glass cage. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every creak of the old building amplified into a potential threat. She moved through the rooms, locking the deadbolts, checking the windows, pulling down the blinds. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Sleep was an impossibility. Her mind raced, replaying every interaction she'd had with Samuel, every detail of his life she'd uncovered. The willow. What was it? Person? A place? A thing? Samuel had worked in the library for 50 years. His life was the library. It had to be connected. Her gaze fell on the stack of books Samuel had recommended over the years, the ones she'd kept, the ones that had led her down this rabbit hole. She picked up a worn copy of The Secret Garden, a book Samuel had always loved. She flipped through the pages, her fingers brushing over the familiar text, searching for anything, any clue, any hidden meaning. Nothing. She needed to think systematically. Samuel had been a man of routine, meticulous in his habits. If he'd hidden something, it would be logical, deliberate. And it would be somewhere only he or someone looking very closely would find. The library. It always came back to the library. Emily spent the rest of the night hunched over her laptop, not for sleep or distraction, but for research. She started with local history, focusing on the time period Samuel had mentioned, the late 1960s, early 1970s. She searched for any businesses, landmarks, or even families with the name Willow in their title or associated with them. She found a few trivial things. Willow Creek subdivision, Willow Street florist, a minor historical figure named Eleanor Willoughby. None of it felt right. None of it resonated with the gravity of Samuel's warning. Then, she broadened her search to the library itself. She delved into its archives, looking for old blueprints, staff rosters from the era, even donation records. The library had undergone a major renovation in 1972, a significant expansion. Could Willow be tied to the building structure? Perhaps a hidden compartment or a forgotten room from the original design. Or maybe a specific section of the library that had been relocated or repurposed. As dawn painted the sky in muted grays and pinks, Emily felt a flicker of something in the back of her mind. Samuel's office. He had worked in the same cramped, dusty office for decades, surrounded by forgotten books and discarded files. He had always been so private about it. He'd meticulously organized his own small corner of the library, almost creating a sanctuary within a sanctuary. She remembered the faint, earthy smell of old paper and dust, and the single small potted plant he'd kept on his desk, a miniature weeping fig, its leaves cascading like a tiny willow. A weeping figure, willow. Could it be that simple? A symbolic reference? Or was it something more direct? The plant itself? Unlikely. But the idea of a plant, something growing, something rooted. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was David. She stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the answer button. Samuel's warning echoed in her head. Asterisk, don't trust anyone. Not the police. Asterisk, she couldn't tell David about Samuel's confession, not yet. Not until she had the evidence. She let it ring, sending it to voicemail. She couldn't risk anything right now. She dressed quickly, choosing practical clothes, her mind already at the library. The familiar route felt different this morning. Every car that passed, every person on the sidewalk, seemed to hold a potential hidden agenda. Paranoia, she knew, was a dangerous thing. But Samuel's words had planted a seed of genuine fear. When she arrived at the library, the morning light filtered through the tall windows, usually a comforting sight. Today, it merely illuminated the vastness of her task. The library, a monument to knowledge, now felt like a labyrinth hiding a deadly secret. She bypassed her own office and headed straight for Samuel's old workspace, which had been cleared out months ago. The new librarian, a young man named Alex, was still setting up. "Morning, Emily," Alex greeted her, looking up from a box of reference books. "Early start today?" Emily forced a smile. "Just trying to get ahead. Thought I'd check on something in Samuel's old files. Did you happen to find anything unusual when you were clearing out his office?" Alex frowned, thinking, "Unusual? Not really. Just a lot of very old, very specific local history journals. And a truly impressive collection of fountain pens. He was a creature of habit, wasn't he? Oh, and he had this weird little wooden box, locked, tucked away in the back of one of his drawers. I just put it in the storage closet with the rest of his personal effects. Didn't want to toss it without checking if family wanted it." A locked wooden box. Emily's heart skipped a beat. A wooden box? What kind of box? Just a plain dark wood box. Nothing fancy. Like an old keepsake box, maybe. "Why?" Alex asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "No reason," Emily said quickly, trying to sound casual. "Just wondering if he had any old records in there. You know, things that might have been overlooked." She moved past Alex towards the storage closet. It was a small windowless room, crammed with old furniture, discarded electronics, and boxes of forgotten items. She scanned the shelves, her eyes darting from one dusty container to another. And then she saw it. Tucked behind a stack of old yearbooks, a dark wooden box. It was indeed plain, unassuming, about the size of a shoebox, with a small tarnished brass clasp. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. It was heavier than she expected. She tried the clasp. Locked. Of course. "Alex, do you mind if I take this box for a moment?" she asked, holding it up. "Might have some old library keys in it, you never know." Alex shrugged. "Sure, go ahead. I was just going to donate most of that stuff anyway." Emily clutched the box to her chest, her mind racing. This felt like it. This had to be it. She retreated to her own office, closing the door and locking it. She placed the box on her desk. How to open it? She didn't have a key and she couldn't risk damaging it. She ran her fingers over the smooth, dark wood. It felt ancient, heavy with secrets. She noticed a faint, almost invisible carving on one side. It was so subtle, barely a scratch, but under the harsh office light, she could just make out a stylized image. A tree. A weeping willow. Her breath caught in her throat. The willow. This was it. This was the key. But how to open it? She looked around her office. Old Samuel had always been resourceful. He'd probably hidden the key somewhere obvious, yet hidden in plain sight. Her gaze fell upon the small, miniature weeping fig plant she'd inherited from Samuel's desk. It sat on her windowsill, its delicate branches drooping elegantly. She'd kept it as a memento, a small piece of his legacy. She walked over to the plant, her heart pounding. She carefully lifted the pot. Nothing. She felt around the rim under the saucer. Nothing. Then she noticed a small loose stone at the bottom of the ceramic pot, almost hidden by the soil. She nudged it with her finger. It wasn't a stone. It was a tiny, intricately carved wooden key. It was almost the exact same dark wood as the box, perfectly camouflaged. With trembling hands, she carefully extracted the key. It was small, delicate, and perfectly formed. She carried it back to the desk, her eyes fixed on the wooden box. This was it. The moment of truth. She inserted the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, a perfect fit. With a soft click, the clasp sprang open. Emily held her breath, her fingers fumbling as she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not just one item, but a collection of objects that seemed to hum with the weight of history. There was an old, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, filled with Samuel's familiar, precise handwriting. Beside it, a stack of grainy black and white photographs, some of which were clearly from the late 60s, early 70s. And beneath those, wrapped in a brittle piece of cloth, was a small, ornate silver locket. But it was the journal that drew her eye first. She carefully lifted it out, her fingers tracing the faded gold lettering on the spine. It wasn't a title, but a single cryptic word, inscribed in a flowing script: Veritas. Truth. Just as Samuel had promised. The truth was hidden here. She flipped open the journal, her eyes scanning the first page. It began with a date, October 14, 1969. And then, Samuel's elegant script began to tell a story she was only just beginning to grasp. A story of fear, of a secret society, of a powerful family, and a terrible injustice. A story he had meticulously documented for 50 years. Emily felt a surge of adrenaline, mixed with a profound sense of dread. She had found the willow. But what she had unearthed was far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The whispers of the past had not only become a roar, they were now a storm gathering around her. And she knew with a bone-deep certainty that the powerful forces Samuel had warned her about were now very much aware that she had found their secret. Her life, once ordinary, had just become a battleground. And the fight, she knew, was only just beginning. The cold dread that had settled in Emily's stomach solidified into a block of ice. She felt it, a palpable shift in the air around her, a subtle but undeniable tightening of an invisible net. Every shadow seemed deeper, every distant sound sharper, every glance from a stranger a potential harbinger of danger. The world, once a familiar stage, had transformed into a labyrinth where unseen eyes tracked her every move. Samuel's warning, once an abstract fear, was now a living, breathing entity. That night, sleep was a battlefield. Her phone, usually a comfort, now felt like an open line to her adversaries. She kept it close, yet dreaded its ring. The next morning, the unease only intensified. A car, a dark sedan, seemed to linger a little too long at the corner of her street. A delivery she hadn't ordered arrived at her doorstep. Her internet connection flickered erratically, and later, she found a strange, small device tucked almost imperceptibly behind her router. It was a listening bug, crude but effective. She ripped it out, her hands shaking, a surge of adrenaline mixing with pure terror. This wasn't just a feeling anymore. This was real. She called Michael, her voice tight with a fear she hadn't known she was capable of. He listened, his usual calm demeanor cracking under the weight of her words. He told her to get out of her apartment immediately, to go somewhere public, somewhere she could blend in. He promised to meet her, bringing Jessica. Jessica, who had been skeptical, now sounded genuinely terrified. "Emily, what have you gotten yourself into?" she had whispered. The question laced with a fear that echoed Emily's own. They met at a bustling coffee shop downtown. The clatter of cups and murmur of conversation, a thin shield against the growing darkness. Emily felt exposed, her eyes darting nervously across the faces around them. Michael, usually so composed, looked haggard, his brow furrowed with worry. Jessica, her face pale, clutched her coffee cup like a lifeline. "They're not just watching," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, recounting the bug, the car, the delivery. "They're making it clear they know." Michael ran a hand through his hair. "This is beyond anything I've ever dealt with them. These aren't just some local thugs." Samuel was right. This is organized, sophisticated. He pulled out his laptop, a small secure model. "I've been going through Samuel's files again, the encrypted ones, trying to find anything, any contingency plan, any further instructions." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes wide. What exactly did you find yesterday, Emily? What is this secret?" Emily took a deep breath, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It wasn't just a document. It was a digital ledger, but not for money. It was a record of influence. A system. Samuel called it the architect's great work. It detailed how a network spanning generations had subtly manipulated information, public discourse, and even historical narratives to steer society in a direction they deemed optimal. It listed key individuals not as members, but as nodes, people in positions of power, media, education, finance, unknowingly or subtly guided to perpetuate this agenda. Michael's fingers flew across his keyboard, his eyes scanning lines of code. "A system designed to shape reality itself," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "That's why Samuel said it was so dangerous. It wasn't about a single conspiracy. It was about the very fabric of truth." Suddenly, Michael froze, his eyes widening. "Wait a minute. There's something here. A hidden partition in the last file Samuel accessed. It's a timestamp, an exact date and time, and a location. The Genesis point, he calls it." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Genesis point? What is it?" "It's an old abandoned research facility on the outskirts of the city," Michael explained, his voice strained. "It was shut down decades ago, supposedly for environmental reasons. But Samuel has a series of encrypted messages here, almost like a diary, detailing his final days before he disappeared. He says he found a master switch there, a way to expose the architect's entire operation, to pull back the curtain on their great work." Jessica's face was a mask of disbelief and growing horror. "You mean he didn't just expose their existence to you? He found a way to expose everything?" "That's what he implies," Emily confirmed, her mind racing. "He says he set up a failsafe. If he went missing or was silenced, the master switch would activate, broadcasting the ledger, the methods, the names of the keynotes to the world." Michael nodded grimly. "But it requires a physical trigger, a specific sequence of actions at the Genesis Point facility. He left a series of riddles, almost like a scavenger hunt, to guide someone to it. He knew it couldn't be digital, too easily intercepted." He looked up, his eyes meeting Emily's. "He designed it for someone like you, Emily. Someone meticulous, someone who would find the note, follow the breadcrumbs." The weight of Samuel's legacy, once an intellectual puzzle, now felt like a crushing burden. He hadn't just left a warning, he'd left a mission. And Emily was the designated executor. "So the architects," Jessica began, her voice trembling slightly, "they know you found the ledger. They know you understand their great work. And now they know you're looking for this Genesis point, to broadcast it all." "Exactly," Emily said, her resolve hardening despite the terror. "They'll be watching for anyone trying to access that facility. They'll know what Samuel was planning, and they'll know that I am the one who can finish it." As if on cue, a notification flashed on Michael's secure laptop. A new, anonymous email had just landed in his inbox. The subject line was chillingly simple: "Genesis Point is monitored." The body of the email contained a single grainy infrared image. It was a satellite view of the old research facility, with the small glowing red dot indicating a specific entrance. And then a second image, a close-up showing a figure standing guard. The figure was clearly armed. "They just confirmed it," Michael whispered, his face ashen. "They're there. They're waiting." Emily felt a cold wave of determination wash over her, pushing aside the fear. Samuel had gambled everything on this. He had trusted her, a stranger, to finish what he started. She couldn't back down now. The stakes were too high, not just for her, but for a truth that had been hidden for generations. "We have to go," Emily stated, her voice steady, surprising even herself. "We have to get to Genesis Point. Before they move the switch, before they disable it, before they silence us all." This isn't just about Samuel anymore. It's about a fundamental right to know. It's about breaking free from the architect's great work. Jessica looked at Emily, then at Michael, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a dawning understanding. But how? They'll be expecting us. They'll be watching every approach. Michael closed his laptop with a decisive snap. Then we don't go in expecting to be unseen. We go in expecting a fight. And we use what Samuel gave us. He didn't just leave clues to the switch. He left a map of their defenses, their blind spots, their weaknesses. He was always one step ahead, even from beyond the grave. Emily nodded, her gaze fixed on the bustling street outside. A world oblivious to the silent war being waged. The architects had revealed themselves. They had shown their hand. And now Emily knew it was her turn to play. The final act of Samuel's desperate gamble, and her own perilous journey, was about to begin. The Genesis point awaited, a dangerous nexus where the truth of the past and the future of reality hung in the balance. There was no turning back. The Genesis point awaited, a dangerous nexus where the truth of the past and the future of reality hung in the balance. There was no turning back. Emily pushed through the dense foliage, the air growing thick with an almost palpable tension, a static charge that prickled her skin. The coordinates David had given her led to a clearing deep within a forgotten section of the old state park, a place rumored to be the site of an ancient meteor strike, a geological anomaly. As she broke through the last line of trees, the sight before her stole her breath. In the center of the clearing stood a massive, intricate construct of gleaming metal and pulsating light. Wires snaked across the ground, connecting to an array of humming generators that sounded like a chorus of angry bees. At its heart, a spherical chamber glowed with an unsettling, iridescent light that seemed to bend the very air around it. It wasn't just a machine. It was an altar to a desperate, brilliant mind. And standing before it, his back to her, was Samuel. He wore a lab coat, smudged with grease and sweat, his hair disheveled, but his posture was rigid, almost defiant. The silence, save for the hum of the machinery, was deafening. "Samuel!" Emily's voice was a ragged whisper breaking the spell. He turned slowly, his eyes wild, haunted, yet blazing with a terrifying conviction. "Emily! You came." There was no surprise, only a grim acceptance. "I knew you would. The note. It was always meant for you." The note was a warning, Samuel, not an invitation to destroy time itself, she countered, her heart pounding against her ribs. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Destroy? No, Emily. I am saving it. Saving us. You don't understand the full scope of what's coming." He gestured wildly at the glowing sphere. "This is it. The Genesis point. The nexus where the fabric of reality is thin, where a subtle push can ripple through existence." "What did you see, Samuel?" she pressed, trying to keep her voice steady, to penetrate the wall of his obsession. His eyes narrowed, and a shudder ran through him. A future where humanity in its arrogance tore itself apart. Not with bombs, not with disease, but with something far more insidious. A slow, agonizing unraveling of truth, of trust, of the very essence of what makes us human. A world where reality fractured, where consensus broke, and the collective mind descended into chaos. A future where the most fundamental elements of our society simply ceased to function, leading to a silent, self-inflicted extinction. And your solution is to rewrite history? To erase choices, to steal free will? Emily took a step closer, feeling the heat emanating from the device. "Not erase, Emily. Redirect. A subtle course correction. The note, the library, the anomalies you've experienced. They were all echoes of my attempts. Each time a slight temporal distortion, a ripple in the past, designed to nudge events, to plant an idea, a seed of caution that would blossom into a different outcome down the line." He pointed to the sphere. "This is the culmination. The precise moment, the perfect frequency to send a single, powerful, focused impulse back to the very moment human consciousness began its accelerating trajectory towards that inevitable collapse. A reset. You're talking about changing the past to prevent a future you only think you saw," Emily argued, her voice rising now. "You don't know the consequences. What if your correction creates something worse? What if it wipes out everything good, everything beautiful? A necessary risk," he roared, stepping towards the machine, his hands hovering over a gleaming console. "The future I saw, it was absolute, irreversible. I sent that note to myself through Sarah, through that book, hoping to find a way, a warning. But I realized warnings aren't enough. Action is needed. The air around them began to crackle, the humming of the generators intensifying. The ground vibrated beneath Emily's feet. The sphere pulsed brighter, its light growing almost blinding. She could feel a strange pressure building in her ears, a distortion in her vision. Time itself seemed to be stretching, thinning. "You're going to tear reality apart, Samuel," she yelled over the rising cacophony. "No, I'm going to mend it." He slammed his hand down on the console. A searing beam of light shot out from the sphere, arcing upwards into the sky. The world around them shimmered, distorting like heat haze on a desert road, but far more profound, far more terrifying. Trees blurred, their colors shifting. The very ground seemed to undulate. Just then, the sound of sirens pierced the surreal chaos. Flashing red and blue lights flickered through the trees. Michael. He had found them. FBI. "Samuel Vance, stand down." Michael's voice, amplified by a bullhorn, cut through the din. He emerged from the trees, a team of agents fanning out behind him, weapons drawn. Samuel didn't even flinch. His gaze was fixed on the pulsating sphere, on the beam of light stretching into the heavens. "Too late, Agent. The process has begun." "Samuel, stop this," Emily pleaded, desperation clawing at her throat. "Think about Sarah. Think about David. About everyone you've dragged into this. The ripple effect isn't just about global catastrophes. It's about individual lives, individual moments. You can't play God." He finally tore his gaze from his creation, looking at her, a flicker of something human in his eyes. "I saw a world without hope, Emily. A world where the note in that book would never even be found because libraries would cease to exist. Where the simple act of sharing a story, a thought, would be impossible. I had to act. I had to save us from ourselves. And who decides what saving looks like?" Emily challenged, moving between him and the console, her hands instinctively reaching for the controls, even though she barely understood them. "You're gambling with everything. Move, Emily," Michael shouted, advancing cautiously, his pistol aimed. "Step away from the device." Samuel's eyes hardened. "I can't stop. It's too late. The temporal feedback loop is already established. To halt it now, the backlash would be catastrophic. It would shatter this entire region, perhaps more. The only way out is through. The impulse must be sent. The correction must be made." Emily felt a sickening lurch, a dizzying sensation that threatened to buckle her knees. The air tasted metallic. The world was screaming. She looked at Samuel, truly looked at him, and saw not a madman, but a man broken by a terrifying vision, consumed by a desperate, misguided attempt at salvation. He was trapped in his own paradox. "There has to be another way," she murmured, her mind racing, recalling David's warnings, the subtle intricacies of temporal mechanics. "If the impulse is sent, what happens to this reality? To us?" Samuel's face contorted. "This reality, this timeline, it would be overwritten. A new one would emerge, gently, seamlessly. We wouldn't remember this. Our lives would simply shift. A better world, Emily. A world where that future never comes to pass." "But it's our world, Samuel," Emily cried, tears blurring her vision. "Our memories, our struggles, our triumphs. They matter. Even the mistakes. They make us who we are." The ground shook violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across the earth. The energy beam pulsed erratically, threatening to destabilize. Michael and his agents hesitated, caught between their orders and the sheer, terrifying spectacle unfolding before them. Emily saw it then, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in the sphere, a flaw in the design, a consequence of Samuel's frantic, solitary work. A weakness. If the impulse was too strong, too unfocused, it wouldn't just rewrite reality. It would shatter it, creating not a better timeline but a void. And Samuel, in his desperation, was pushing it to its absolute limit, a hair's breadth from total collapse. "Samuel, the resonance cascade," Emily shouted, pointing to the sphere, her voice barely audible above the roar. "It's unstable. You're going to overload it." He looked, his eyes widening in horror as he finally saw what she saw. He had pushed his creation beyond its limits, driven by fear and a singular purpose. The temporal feedback was not just stabilizing, it was amplifying, distorting itself. No, that's not right," he stammered, frantically typing on the console, his earlier confidence evaporating into pure panic. "I miscalculated the field harmonics." You have to shut it down, Samuel. Emily grabbed his arm. Now, before it tears everything apart. I can't, he choked out, his fingers flying over the controls, but the machine was no longer responding to his commands. It had taken on a life of its own. A monstrous engine of temporal destruction. The failsafes, they're overridden by the feedback loop. Michael and his team were closing in, but Emily knew they were useless against this. This wasn't a criminal act to be stopped with bullets. It was a cosmic event. Emily looked at the note in her hand, the one Samuel had sent to Sarah, the one that had started everything. Asterisk, the future is not fixed. It is a tapestry woven by every choice. Do not unravel it. Asterisk. The note, she whispered, a desperate idea forming. It was a warning to you, Samuel. Not just to me. You sent it to yourself to try and stop yourself from making this mistake. Samuel stared at her, a glimmer of understanding, of agonizing regret, finally breaking through the madness in his eyes. He saw the paradox, the tragic irony of his own message. He had become the very thing he sought to warn against. With a sudden, decisive movement, Samuel pushed Emily away from the console, towards Michael and the agents. Get back. All of you. Get clear. Samuel, no. Emily screamed, realizing his intent. He turned back to the console, his expression resolute. He knew he couldn't shut it down from the outside, not without risking the catastrophic backlash he had described. But there was one way, one final, desperate act to prevent the unmaking of reality. He would have to become part of the machine to absorb the temporal energy to contain the cascade from within. Tell them, Emily, he said, his voice strangely calm now, almost serene, as if a great burden had been lifted. Tell them it was for a reason. Tell them. The future is still unwritten. It's up to them to write it well. With a final agonizing push, he lunged for the glowing sphere, disappearing into its shimmering heart just as the energy beam reached a terrifying crescendo. The air shrieked. The ground bucked. A blinding flash of white light consumed the clearing, followed by a deafening boom that knocked Emily and Michael off their feet. Then silence. The light faded. The hum of the generators died. The intricate construct of metal and wire was gone, utterly vaporized. There was only a scorched crater where it had stood, and the lingering smell of ozone. Samuel was gone. Michael scrambled to his feet, his face pale with shock, his agents equally stunned, their weapons still aimed at empty air. What just happened? Emily slowly pushed herself up, her body aching, her mind reeling. She looked at the empty crater, at the place where Samuel Vance, the man who tried to save the world by remaking it, had vanished. The temporal distortion was gone. The world felt solid again, real, but it was irrevocably changed for her. He stopped it, she whispered, her voice hoarse. He saved us. From himself. In the days and weeks that followed, the official story would be a complex, heavily redacted account of a rogue scientist, an experimental energy device, and an unforeseen accident. Michael, shaken but vindicated, would push for a cover-up, recognizing the sheer impossibility of the truth. Emily, however, carried the full weight of it. She returned to the library, to her quiet life, but nothing was truly quiet anymore. The note, the crumpled piece of paper, was a constant reminder. Asterisk, the future is not fixed. It is a tapestry woven by every choice. Do not unravel it. Asterisk. Samuel had tried to unravel it, and in the end, he had sacrificed himself to reweave it, to give humanity another chance. But the question remained. Had his sacrifice truly averted the future he foresaw, or merely delayed it? Had his impulse, his desperate correction, truly been contained, or had it subtly, imperceptibly, altered the tapestry in ways no one could ever fully comprehend? Emily now understood that the true mystery wasn't just about a strange note in a library book, but about the profound, terrifying responsibility that comes with knowing the future is not fixed. It is indeed a tapestry woven by every choice, every action, every whispered word. And sometimes the most dangerous thing of all is not the unknown, but the desperate attempt to control what was never meant to be controlled. She would never look at a library book or a quiet moment or the vast unknowable expanse of time the same way again. The note was gone, a casualty of the genesis point, but its message, Samuel's final tragic lesson, was etched forever into the very fabric of her being. The future was not fixed, and that was both humanity's greatest freedom and its most terrifying burden.